Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking one of the absolute most famous stories in human history, and we're going to look at it through a completely fresh lens. I mean, if you think you already know everything there is to know about the feeding of the 5,000, well, get ready. Because we are about to peel back the historical, linguistic, and symbolic layers of this unbelievable event. We aren't just talking about bread and fish today, no. We are digging into cultural contexts, hidden language, and honestly, some pretty deep psychological truths about the human condition.
So to kick things off, 27,000. When we hear this story, we usually picture, a moderate crowd of about 5,000 people. But historical texts specifically note that the 5,000 figure, that only counted the men. So if you factor in the women and children who were undoubtedly there, just assuming a conservative average of wives and children, the crowd gathered out in the wilderness that day was likely a massive 27,000 people. I mean, just imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of a crowd that size stranded in a totally remote location.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, the miracle in the multitude. Second, a visceral compassion. Third, hidden symbols and leftovers. Fourth, the bread of life. And finally, number 5, faith over food.
Starting with Section 1, the miracle and the multitude. Let's set the scene.
To really grasp the magnitude of what happened here, we first have to understand the deeply human and frankly, completely exhausting setup of this specific day. Literally right before this massive crowd gathered, Jesus had just received the devastating news that his cousin, John the Baptist, had been murdered. So he and his disciples were emotionally drained, they were physically exhausted from dealing with endless crowds, and they were actively seeking out a remote place for a furlough, just a quiet retreat to grieve and catch their breath. But instead of peace and quiet, what happens? They're met by this huge impromptu crowd of thousands who had actually tracked them down on foot. And the only resources they have to deal with this massive, hungry crowd? A young boy who just happened to bring a meager lunch, 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish.
Now, you might be wondering, how on earth does a crowd of tens of thousands of people wander miles away from home without packing, any food? Well, it actually speaks perfectly to human nature. It's very much like those modern hikers who get completely captivated by something like the Grand Canyon. They see a trail, they get totally swept up in the excitement and the stunning scenery, and they just keep walking. Then hours later, they realize they are miles deep into the wilderness without a backpack, without a flashlight, or any food whatsoever. This ancient crowd did the exact same thing. They got so caught up in the excitement of following a miracle worker that they completely lost track of time and their own basic needs until evening hit, and that deep hunger really set in.
Which brings us to Section 2, a visceral compassion, or a gut reaction.
So the disciples, they just wanted to send this massive, super inconvenient crowd away, like, go find your own food, right? But Jesus had a completely different reaction. To really understand it, we need to look at this fantastic, albeit totally hard to pronounce Greek word splaknizomai. Go ahead, try to say it, splunk-nitsomai. In our modern translations, this is usually just rendered as Jesus being moved with compassion when he saw the needy multitude. But as we'll see in a second, that very polite English translation barely scratches the surface of what this word actually conveys. It's a recurring motif in the original texts for a highly specific type of profound empathy.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating here is the literal translation of that Greek word. It literally means to have one's bowels yearn. I know, it sounds a little strange to us today, but because the innermost organs were considered the seat of human emotion in the ancient world, this word describes an experience that starts deep down in the gut. This wasn't just some passing feeling of pity from a distance. No, it was a gut-wrenching physical ache of empathy. It was an emotion so intense, so visceral, that it absolutely demanded immediate action. Jesus didn't just feel bad for them. His gut reacted to their need, and it completely propelled him to act.
Moving on to Section 3, hidden symbols and leftovers. Time to decode the meal.
Okay, so we know the physical items used in this event were simple, but they actually hold this rich, fascinating Jewish context that the original audience would have instantly recognized. First, let's look at the lunch itself. This was definitely not a feast waiting to happen. The 5 loaves, they were not big, fluffy bakery loaves. Actually, they were coarse, unleavened barley wafers. Think of them essentially as small, hard pitas. Barley was much cheaper than wheat, making it the staple food of the absolute poorest people. And the 2 fish weren't massive catches either. They were small, dried, pickled sardines, most likely from the local fisheries in Magdala. This really highlights just how incredibly humble the starting materials were, which, honestly, brilliantly sets the stage for the sheer scale of the multiplication miracle that's about to follow.
And when we impartially look at the theological perspectives and rabbinic symbolism of the time,
we realize the numbers aren't random at all. Bread is very often used in Jewish tradition to symbolize the Torah. So, the 5 loaves, they wonderfully mirror the 5 books of Moses. The fish carry rich imagery too, pointing toward the eschatological banquet of the Leviathan, or even playfully referencing the Aramaic word for fish, Nun, as in Joshua son of Nun. And what about those 12 baskets of leftovers? They didn't just collect them to avoid food waste. They distinctly symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel, and they also allude to the 12 loaves of the bread of the presence kept in the temple. It is just this beautifully layered message of total, complete provision for the nation.
Now watch how this builds when we compare this event to a very similar one, the feeding of the 4,000. Often people completely confuse these two, but they are actually separate events with highly targeted meanings. The feeding of the 5,000 happened in Jewish territory, yielding those 12 baskets for the 12 tribes of Israel. But later, Jesus feeds 4,000 people in Gentile territory, and that time, they collect exactly 7 baskets of leftovers. In biblical numerology, 7 represents completeness and the broader world. So this shows us that these miracles were actually repeated, deliberate teaching tools. They were tailored specifically to communicate spiritual provision first to the Jewish audience, and then later to the Gentile world.
Which brings us to section 4, the bread of life. We're getting into sacramental theology here.
So how did the early church understand all of this? Well, for early believers, this wasn't just some cool story about a free lunch in the wilderness. It became a foundational cornerstone for sacramental theology. Notice the sequence of actions in the historical accounts. Jesus takes the bread, he looks up and gives thanks, he breaks it, and he distributes it. That specific 4-part action mirrors exactly what happens later at the Last Supper. The early church viewed this massive feeding in the wilderness as a direct parallel to the Exodus, where God rained down manna from heaven. But here, it brilliantly prefigures the ultimate Eucharistic meal, deeply symbolizing divine nourishment.
And to really cement that connection, consider the word klasma. This is a very rare Greek word used in the texts to describe the broken fragments that were collected at the end of the meal. And what's absolutely amazing is that this exact same rare word, klasma, shows up again in the Didache, which is the earliest known Christian Eucharistic liturgy. This explicitly ties the feeding of the multitudes to the practice of early Christian communion. It was this beautiful demonstration of a radically inclusive table. Out there in the wilderness, all the normal social boundaries of the day, status, wealth, background, they were completely erased.
Finally, section 5, faith over food, the ultimate lesson.
While all these historical and linguistic layers are super fascinating, the psychological and practical lesson here is just profound. Get this, the very next day the crowd tracked Jesus down again. But they weren't looking for spiritual truth. As one of our sources aptly calls it, they were just looking for kingdom food stamps. They wanted the free material benefits, the easy comfort, but without any of the deeper discipleship. Jesus directly challenged their materialism. He tells them, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures. The crucial point is, he used the physical food to teach them that what they really needed was spiritual sustenance, totally pushing them to elevate their faith way beyond their immediate physical appetites.
Which brings us to the ultimate question this explainer leaves us with. When we face our own wilderness moments, our own truly impossible situations, what are we really after? Are we just looking for the loaves, the quick fixes, the material comforts, the easy way out? Or are we seeking the bread of life, that deeper, enduring sustenance that transforms how we view our entire reality? It is a powerful question that echoes from a remote, grassy hillside right into our lives today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.